Let's continue this morning in the Gospel of Mark. Gospel of Mark, we've made it into chapter 7. Chapter 6 and 7 are much the same in that they continue a theme of opposition to Jesus and opposition to everything he says and to everything he does. The question that is raised in Mark chapter 7, there beginning in verse 14, is a message about purity. What's the Jewish, particularly the scribes and the Pharisees, what's their notion of purity?
Godly, clean on the outside.
Pardon?
You're more godly, or?
Yeah, the more stuff we do in it, the more commands we follow, the more of these outward shows that we require everybody to do, these traditions, the more of that we do. That ritual purity had so long been ingrained in Jewish thought that it seemed to them that, well, if clean was good, then being scrupulously, obsessively, fanatically clean must be better. The purer they are, well, what's the problem with that mindset?
Self-righteous.
Pardon?
Self-righteous.
Good answer. Self-righteous. It's a notion that's still evident in religions today. You know, the Roman Church, if saying the rosary once is good, let's say it 10 times. If all these things that we can do, it's in a sense like, well, if we do enough good stuff, then God's got to be pleased. That's not but about that far from the whole notion of karma. If I do enough good stuff, he's got to be pleased. Things ought to go well for me. That false presumption of physical washing. What's the opposite of this? When you come to 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 21, what's it say about baptism there? Not the removal of filth from the body, but the answer of a good conscience towards God. That's purity. Doing as God has said, that's purity. Not this notion that by anything that man could do, and by doing even more of it, that somehow we're pleasing to God. The problem in Mark 7 is, again, just the Jews being so, particularly the Pharisees, being so convinced that they're ceremonially clean that they can't recognize genuine filth. They really cannot recognize spiritual impurity. So while the crowd is coming to Jesus, a lot of it in that coming is emotionally driven. The Pharisees have been upset because the people coming to Jesus are almost fanatical about it. I mean, nothing's going to stop them from getting there. And so it's time for the people to begin to reason critically. You know, yes, you're coming for healing, and Jesus is going to provide that for those who have faith in him. Yes, but it's time to think critically about this matter. Beginning in verse 14. Mark chapter 7, verse 14. After he called the crowd to him again, he's given the answer to the Pharisees. Now he's called the crowd. He began saying to them, "Listen to me, all of you, and understand." We got to this part last week. Listen to me, and implied not to the Pharisees or anything else, that anyone who preaches a different message. Listen to me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside the man which can defile him if it goes into him, but the things which proceed out of the man are what defile the man. If anyone has ears to hear, let him hear. The problem is that everybody else talking, and what they have so long heard the Jews or the Pharisees teach, well, what men say may sound so good. So it's all the more important to listen to Jesus. By listening there, he means carefully consider. Come on, Paul. That's an easy word. You can say that. Carefully consider, evaluate yourself and what men are saying in light of what Jesus said in verse 7. Mark 7, verse 7. But in vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the precepts of men, neglecting the commandments of God. You hold to the traditions of men. It answers really the question, are you doing right? Is it even possible to do right by rejecting God's command? You know, they're really a basic critical thinking skill to compare the effect of what is inside us versus what is outside us. And the difference is of this teaching, what will you receive? What will you internalize? We're always looking towards the heart. What will you take into your heart? Whatever the world says, whatever religious men might claim is so. Listen to me. Jesus is going to teach this whole crowd about purity. What's the point? Sometimes these explanations in our day sound almost a little bit like doublespeak. What's the crucial point? There's nothing outside of me or you that can defile the inside. He's talking here specifically about things eaten. What do you take into your body? What defiles the person is that which proceeds out of the mouth. That's a physical illustration of a spiritual matter that comes beginning in verse 17. Here's what's important. When he had left the crowd and entered the house, his disciples questioned him about the parable, about what he just said. What do you mean by this? What defiles and what doesn't? And he said to them, are you so lacking in understanding also? Remember, we talked about this last week, all the way from chapter 4 through chapter 14. Continually, do you not yet understand? Are you so lacking in understanding? In other words, when are you going to get this? Are you so lacking? Verse 18. In understanding also, do you not understand that whatever goes into the man from outside cannot defile him, because it does not go into his heart? He's talking about physical food. But into his stomach, and is eliminated. Thus he declared all foods clean. And he was saying that which proceeds out of the man, that is what defiles the man. Or from within, out of the heart of men, proceed the evil thoughts and all these ugly things that go with it. Evil thoughts, fornications, thefts, murders, and adulteries, deeds of coveting and wickedness, as well as deceit and sensuality, evil, slander, pride, and foolishness. All these evil things proceed from within and defile the man. Sounds very much like our Galatians 5 study on Wednesday night. There, Paul writing to the church in Galatia, what is still a problem in the church? Then and still. Well, the disciples, when they're not yet understanding, the problem is sometimes they're thinking literally. Like what a man may spit out or even vomit. And Jesus is disappointed by this. In other words, asking, are you still like the crowd out there? while many are focused on external things. I mean, that's just how they've lived for 1,000 years. The disciples should be focusing on internals. Internal things. By now they should be getting a handle on this. Jesus is talking about repentance from the heart. It's the very first message he preached. The first message the prophets preached. Got to change the heart. And so it's by these physical process by which the body eliminates what is used up or what is bad. The corrupt heart is a far, far greater concern. Of course, again, why is he even talking about food? Because of the Pharisees. All their requirements, and no telling how many more requirements they had added to that. The heart's a far greater concern. So we just read from verse 20 to 23 this list of defilements, things which proceed from within. When he talks about the heart, what's he meaning? He means the genuine representation of what or who that person is. You see, here Jesus is defining purity, of course, on God's terms. Being unlike these 12 or 13 examples of a heart's evil. That's what defiles the man. Many of those are evident in the Pharisees and the scribes, but of course then also evident in this crowd. For whatever reason they've come, and most of them have come for healing, and that's good. And some of them have come by genuine faith, and that's good. But evident among this crowd still are all these evil matters. And so, since that command there in verse 14, where Jesus says, "Listen to me, all of you, and understand." This is the change that must come about. What ought we then to understand? If the disciples then were having so much trouble with this, what must we understand? When we talk about purity, what has to be pure in us? The heart, the motivation. That which proceeds out of a person in word and action. Yes, that's a concern. That's the evidence of the problem within the heart. In purity, we see then by Jesus saying, "Listen to me." It cannot be defined by man. You know, there's moral standards today which are abominations to God, and people pretend they're pure. Kind of the opposite of the Pharisees. Well, not really. You know, how many things, well, no, we don't want to go down that road, that people are celebrating today as being right and pure. That's not by God's definition, is it? Certainly not. There may be traditions of men which do not contradict or neglect God's commands, but and of those things, doing them neither makes man pure or impure. It's just what we do, isn't it? We use songbooks. That doesn't make me pure or impure. If I knew all the words of all those hymns by heart, that wouldn't make me any better than somebody has to read every word. That's just what we do. So, but pretending, and as they're doing, binding these traditions on others as evidence of purity is really, even in the words that Jesus uses there to all those evils, it's really just bogus religion. It's just bogus. I mean, it's pride, it's foolishness. On the other hand, let's consider this for a moment. Bucking traditional norms. There's some people who just really want to buck everything. That can be a problem too, can it? Just to prove that you can? Well, that's also being proud and foolish and arrogant. It's not evidence of a pure heart. If I go into a place whose ways are very different culturally, I'm going to go in there and say, no, that's not the way we did it in Sammy. You can't, no, they're not impure because they don't do it like we do. But it's this whole notion in all of these things, these who are in opposition to the things of Christ, what are they doing? Taking their eyes off God. Let's see if I can make you like me. And if you're like me, then surely you would be pure then. Jesus is saying, no. Well, now we go from this chapter 6 and 7, from this several instances of opposition, and Jesus returns. Yes, sir.
So, you started out talking about evaluation. We evaluate what we do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really important, because when you evaluate, you're trying to validate that what we're doing is correct. It meets God's requirements. And if you don't understand the requirements, you don't know if you're valid or not. And just because that's the way you've always done it is not, and you may sincerely do it, but you may be sincerely wrong. So sincerity is important, but sincere obedience per God's requirements is what's...
I just mentioned it briefly. Who defines purity? God. It is one of those cases. What I think, what somebody else thinks, just doesn't get it.
Not the standard.
It's not the standard. And we can't say, because I do it this way, that somebody else does it different, so long as it doesn't violate Scripture, that they're impure. But that's why Jesus says, listen to me and, what's the other word? Understand. The Pharisees always take an issue with Jesus and how he interprets the law and how he applies the law. And they don't begin to understand that. That's why he does it. They've got to come to a new mind, a new heart. Let's see this how God sees it, not how we want to see it. So he transitions, Mark's account transitions again, beginning in verse 24, from a teaching ministry to his miraculous ministry. In all of these, beginning in chapter 1 and up through chapter 8, verse 26, let's be reminded, what are these miracles accomplishing? What is, through Mark's writing, what is it that the Gentiles should begin to see? All these miracles establish that Jesus is the Son of God. That's one purpose of them. The other is to develop this understanding, a spiritual understanding in the disciples, both his 12 chosen ones and all the rest who would follow him. Which is basically what? Repentance. They've got to redefine the terms of life, and you get right down to it. What's the change that's necessary in us, or in sinners who believe in Jesus and obey the gospel and are added to the church? What's necessary? You got to redefine. We don't have to redefine, they're defined for us. We've got to understand all the things that God has defined are pertaining to life. as Peter talks about it. It's getting to be one of my favorite verses, about all things in the church pertaining to life and godliness. Peter didn't define it. God did. And so that's what he's working on here, to reshape the mind, reshape the heart. Well, starting here in chapter 7, verse 24, we're in the home stretch of the pre-crucifixion miracles, only 4 more to go. In chapter 7, verse 24 through chapter 8 and verse 9, there's 3 miracles in rather quick succession. What's important about these is that they follow the discussion, immediately follow that discussion about genuine purity. They're all performed as well in areas where the Gentiles live. And so as well, not only for the Pharisees, but for all the people. They are coming, again, 2 purposes: to establish that Jesus is the Son of God, and to develop this entirely new, God-shaped definition of purity. And it follows, these miracles follows that declaration of Jesus in Mark 7 and verse 19. There he is declared all foods clean. And so, what's that tell of the other Jews? And what's that even tell of the Gentiles? If Jesus is declared all things clean, and the Pharisees come after them and start harassing them and accusing them and all that, what's he telling them? Don't be bothered by that. That's their way, that's their tradition, that's their noise. Jesus said all that is past, or is passing. And so it's foreshadowing the age, really, when the Jews and the Gentiles will be one in one body. So, beginning in verse 24. Bruce, we're in Gospel of Mark, verse 7, or chapter 7, beginning verse 24. It's interesting how this works. Jesus wasn't intending to minister in this way at this time. Jesus got up and went away from there to the region of Tyre. And when he entered a house, he wanted no one to know of it. And yet he could not escape notice. But after hearing of him, a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately came and fell at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile of the Syrophoenician race. And she kept asking him to cast the demon out of her daughter. He was saying to her, "Let the children be satisfied first. For it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." But she answered and said to him, "Yes, Lord, but even the dogs under the table feed on the children's crumb." And he said to her, "Because of this answer, go. The demon has gone out of your daughter." And going back to her home, she found the child lying on the bed, the demon having left. This Syrophoenician woman understands better than Jesus' disciples at the time, didn't she? It's an amazing conversation. At first, Jesus wasn't intending to minister this way at that time, but since he was seen, since his fame has spread even among the Gentiles, he cannot escape notice. So what's Jesus going to do? Anyone who comes to him with this kind of faith, what he had planned, that gets quickly set aside, doesn't it? If this woman comes to me with this kind of faith, to put up with all the abuse and persecution that a woman of that race would have suffered, to come to Jesus and and trust he can do this for her daughter. Whatever he might have had planned, that gets set aside. And so I really like the fact that Jesus is trying to lay low. Again, he hadn't planned to, but what's implied? Who's controlling Jesus' plans? You know, you talk about all these proofs that he is the Son of God. Who's setting Jesus' plan? God. And so he also implied that this beautiful truth that wherever there is a need, Jesus' heart compels him to serve. And again, this comes right after this teaching about purity of the heart. What's Jesus demonstrating here? Wherever there's a need, he's going to serve. Here's a woman confessing her need. She's prostrating herself at Jesus' feet. Evidencing what? Here's another example of faith such as that Jesus doesn't even see among the Jews. You know, he's seen that before. People come to him and he's told them, I don't even see that among my own people. But here's this woman. So, to be certain, he's going to minister to her. Now, by custom, you can be sure that by the social traditions of the Jews, there's several reasons that Jesus ought not have anything to do with this woman. I mean, by the traditions of men, he wouldn't even get close to this woman. First off, because she is a woman. Rabbis just didn't do that. You just didn't talk to her. She's a Gentile, but of a particularly notorious kind. She's a Syro-Phoenician from Tyre. What's that tell you? Tyre and Sidon, that whole region. These are the people that are absolute worst, fiercest enemies of the Jews and of the Jews' God. Remember Tyre and Sidon, the ancient city? They thought no one could ever tear that place down. Walls 300 feet high. Nobody's ever going to destroy that city. Who did? God did. But there has been, from the beginning, this intense hatred of the Phoenicians against the Jews. They hate their God. Not even Jehovah could defeat them, they thought. And yet she's persistent in trying to get Jesus' attention, trying to make this plea, because she knows what he can do. Yes.
How did she know? What convicted her heart that he was the man?
It simply had to be the evidence of his teaching and hearing about what he had done, you know, in every place. Here, he heals, but don't go tell anybody about it. Well, they all told. She's seen this. Jesus is, by this time, 2 years into his earthly ministry. This news is spread everywhere. That's why he can't go anywhere without a crowd already being there. She's heard about it.
But she had some knowledge to carry on an intelligent conversation with
Yeah,
the man.
she did. And interesting, the nature of that conversation. Most people would have been offended by this. Read that conversation. I mean, it's like, Jesus, are you being kind here, or are you being insulting here? She understands. And so, in this, there's a fascinating play on words here. When he uses the word, your daughter, verse 29. This whole conversation, beginning in verse 27, let the children be satisfied first, for it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. There's a racial slur in that. If this woman was not of such strong faith, she, she knows who he's talking about. She's the dog. But she answered, "Yes, Lord. But even the dogs under the table feed from the children's crumb." Who are the children sitting at the table? That's the Jews. They presume the right to be seated at the table. They're eating first. They eat of the best. And if there happened to be something left over, well, when it's swept out the door, maybe the dogs could eat it. I mean, this is, on purely human terms, could be an insulting conversation. But she understands. She knows what the world thinks of her and what they think of her people. But she knows. Verse 29, and he said to her, "Because of this answer, go. The demon has gone out of your daughter." I want to look at this word for daughter, and it's a rare one. Not the typical word for daughter. Doesn't particularly even imply anything about the age. This word for daughter means a little daughter of God. Now, what's the picture show? All these children seated around the table, and this one under the table is a daughter of God as well. This little dog girl under the table. What's that foretell?
We can't prejudge.
Pardon?
It's coming to God.
It foretells when the Jews and the Gentiles will all be seated at the same table. And he's already saying it there in the word that he used for daughter. This, in one sense, little dog girl is going to be the daughter of God. She'll be seated at the table. She'll eat not of the crumbs, but she'll feast from the promises of God.
Oh,
Yeah.
God's never made it a secret that his intention was that all nations, it started with the promise that he gave to Abraham, that through him all nations would be blessed, and he was talking about all, everybody. And so it's like the Jews conveniently would pick and choose what they wanted to remember, to be obedient to, just like we do today. But they didn't like the idea that these lowly Gentiles were going to have the rights and privileges and blessings that they had, because they saw themselves as many steps above, I suppose. But these
Well, they saw, the problem is they see it as being totally exclusive. Only them, no one else. In Jesus, verse 19, he commends that answer. Or verse 29. That answer in verse 28, that's a statement of faith. She understands what the Jews and the Pharisees and what at that time even Jesus' own disciples seemed to find hard to understand. That's a statement of faith. That's why he commends that answer. The Gentiles will be children of Jehovah. It parallels how the Gentiles will also receive the gospel. Yes, to the Jews first, but to all. Yes, Jeff?
You know, it's amazing when you look at that. He says, first let the children eat all they want. I mean, it was given freely to the Jews, and yet they didn't partake of it.
And listen to the word. She says, but even those under the table eat from the crumbs. What crumbs is she talking about? The feeding of the 5,000? When all that was left over was gathered into the baskets so that others would also eat? That's this picture, isn't it?
And it was more than what they had to start with.
More. So the Gentiles will eat. Even somebody like a Syrophoenician is going to eat of this. And after every one of those feedings, there's always much left to spare. There's still much left to spare even for us to eat from today. And so, it is fascinating to me how often Jesus says, "Do you not yet understand?" Look who understands. Through all these miracles, who is it that understands? Those who have a heart to believe. Those who really are listening. Not just to the sound of the words, but for understanding. They come to Him. Those who are truly dialed in, listening, for the purpose of understanding. They come to Him. They prostrate themselves at His feet. She sees more clearly, being a Gentile, than does His own people. He was just in Nazareth, wasn't he? What's it say about His miracles in Nazareth? He really couldn't do anything big and that would draw too much attention, but rather just when He walks on by somebody, He touches when He touches them. She understands. Children at the table, eating as one family of God. Beginning then, did you have something?
Well, it just makes me wonder, she was in a humble circumstance, and a lot of times people, when they're humble, and in humble circumstances, their heart is more open.
That's true universally. From the moment Jesus began to teach, what did He say? "I did not come to call the righteous, but those who know they're sick." Jesus can't do anything for someone who is arrogant and proud and self-righteous and presumes that they are pleasing to God on their own terms. What can He do for that kind of person? Nothing. Jesus hasn't come to force this faith on people, but to cause them to hear it and to see it. And it's only those who know their need of healing, and those who confess that need. And it is provided in marvelous ways. What's it about? Purity of heart. Verse 31 and following. Again He went out from the region of Tyre and came through Sidon to the Sea of Galilee. He's come from along the western shore, gone northwest over to Galilee, in the region of the Decapolis. And they brought to Him one who was deaf and spoke with difficulty, and they implored Him to lay His hand on him. Jesus took him aside from the crowd by Himself and put His fingers into his ears, and after spitting, He touched his tongue with the saliva. And looking up to heaven with a deep sigh, He said to him, "Ephphatha," which is, "Be open." And his ears were opened, and the impediment of his tongue was removed, and he began speaking plainly. And He gave them orders not to tell anyone, but the more that He ordered them, the more widely they continued to proclaim it. And they were utterly astonished that He had done all things well. He makes even the deaf to hear and the mute to speak. What we used to call the deaf and dumb. Couldn't hear, couldn't speak clearly. Again, what do you have? Another outcast. Remember, there was a deaf and dumb kid in the school that I grew up, the way we used to call it. Did anybody want to play with him? No, but who would know his need? Who is it that would come to Jesus? And so this demon is also going to be exorcised. This man, so many people in so many ways are just misfits. And And the Jews, again, would, their mindset was, you're just not quite good enough. You can't be part of God's kingdom. What are you worth? They would say nothing. But he knows. In this unusual manner, Jesus takes him aside from the multitude, ministering to him alone. Now this is strange, the whole ears and eyes things. What's he doing? He's touching the affected organs, the parts which do not work. He wouldn't have to do so. But he is showing to this man, since he really can't see and he can't speak. It's difficult to have a communication like he did with the Syrophoenician woman. So in that man's darkness, he feels Jesus touch his ears, touch his tongue. Amazing. And he says, be healed. How would you like that to be the first two words you ever heard clearly? This grown man lived his life that way. And clearly, be healed and able to speak. Of course, don't tell a word of this to anyone, and everyone does. Why does Mark keep writing this? It's not to be told, but he writes it, and it is told because of this testimony. Every time somebody goes out and tells this, what's the point of it? What's the message there? He has done all things well. When we talk about Jesus doing all things well, what's it say about him? Again, remember the purposes of the miracles is to establish that he is the Son of God. And it says he has done all things well. What's the message? What's the message? Again, foretelling the time that when this salvation that he brings comes first to the Jews and then all the people, open to all the nations, they'll understand this is the Son of God. Because he has done all these things well, these people are going to go out and tell others he's done all things well. Now, as a lesson to the disciples, even to us today, what's that message? They're then told, don't go tell it, and they did. Today, what's our situation? We're told to go tell it, and oftentimes we don't. Don't we have a message to tell? Behold, he has done all things well. Just as God the Father in heaven said to do it, just as God the Father in heaven empowered him to do it, gave him the authority to establish it and enact it and uphold it, he does all things well. It's a powerful testimony that all that God has said, Jesus did it not only by letter exactly as he said, he did it with the purest motivation, with the highest intent to bless all mankind. He did all things well. I guess we best wrap up there.